Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Convenience Brokerage. My name is Mohammed. In this video, I'm going to explain to you about the TLC Rules Regulation. This is study material for the TLC exam, Part 2. I have Part 1 as well. Check out my Part 1 if you haven't watched Part 1. This is going to be Part 2. So this is the table of contents. I'm just going to do rules. This is basically, you'll be learning about the neighborhoods of Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. You'll be learning about highways and expressways. Monuments in Manhattan and all four boroughs besides Manhattan. You'll be learning about famous places, like for example, if somebody tells you to take me to Empire State Building in Manhattan, you're supposed to know where it is. Or if they tell you to take me to Museum of Natural History, as a driver, you're supposed to know those important places to go. So I'm going to be going over some of the questions that they're going to be asking you during the TLC test. I'm going to be like a guide to you for those people. So hopefully I'll try my best to help you out as much as possible. Let's get started. Now, obviously, if you're taking the TLC test, you'll be driving yellow cab, green cab, black car, Uber, Lyft, Juno, whatever you think of. Now it's only one license. So basically, you're taking one test now. Back in the days, for higher vehicle license, you didn't have to take any type of test. I'm talking about 6-7 years ago, and they actually just went in and applied and they got the license. The yellow cabs were the only ones that had to take a written test, such as something similar to this, and now the rules have a little bit changed. So I'm going to be going over some of the rules of the TLC overall in general, which questions can be asked during the TLC. So let's go to section 54-17, operation rates, charges, and payment. No overcharges. A driver must not charge or attempt to charge a fare above the commission approved rates. This includes a fare in the street hail livery for a hail trip or a fare for any trip initiated or accepted through an e-hail application. A driver must not impose or attempt to impose any additional charges for transporting a person with a disability, a service animal accompanying a person with a disability, or a wheelchair or other mobility aid. Now, what does it mean by no overcharges? You can't charge somebody more money. Electronic hail, that's a little bit difficult to do because everything is automatic electronic as the meter is running in the background. The only way the person can be overcharging is if that person drops off a customer at one destination and shows that he dropped off a customer 20 miles from the original destination. That's the only way of overcharging it. Other than that, you can't overcharge a person on because of race, sex, disability, or anything like that. If you do, there is a fine, there is a penalty for that, so just keep that in mind. Now, a driver must not collect or attempt to collect separate fares from individual passengers who have snared a taxi cab or street hail livery for part of all trip unless such fares are specially authorized as part of the group riding program established by the commission. And the fine for these penalties are $50 to $100, and you get 2 points on your license, so be careful with that part. A driver must not ask a passenger for a tip or indicate that a tip is expected or required. You can't do that. You can't ask passengers for a tip. Tip is optional from a passenger if they want to give a driver a tip or not. So keep that in mind. If there's a $50 fine for that, there's no points on the license for that part. You're okay. Non-payment customer. If a passenger refuses to pay the meter fare, the driver must place the meter in the off or vacant position, illuminating the off-duty light, and before the off-duty change date, illuminating the off-duty light of driving a taxi cab, or enter off-duty into the taximeter if driving a street hail livery. Record the amount of fare on the taximeter onto the trip record through the taxi cab technology system, or LPEP, or onto the written trip record of the TPEP or LPEP is not working, and proceed directly to the nearest police precinct, present the facts to the police, and follow the instructions for resolving the dispute. After the off-duty change date, if a passenger refuses to pay the meter fare, the driver must place the meter in the off or vacant position to enter off into the taximeter, and record the amount of fare into the trip record through the taxi cab technology system or LPEP, or into the written trip record in the TPEP or LPEP is not working, and proceed directly to the nearest police station and prevent the facts of the police and follow the instructions for resolving the disputes. Basically, what they're saying is a driver must accept United States currency for payment for services as well. Forgot to mention that part. So if the passenger doesn't pay the driver, you can just force the passenger to, oh, give me the money. But then you have to go through some legal process. The best part is if you're driving a yellow cab or a green cab, you have to use the following technology because it's a system. You have to be off duty and vacant, and you have to go to the nearest police station and obviously file a report with them and let the police go from there. If you don't obey the law, you can get fined for $100. It is a fine for that. Just keep that in mind. So make sure you read about that part. Making changes. A driver must always be capable of making change for a $20 bill during his or her work shift. If a driver is not able to change a $20 bill, the driver will, with the passenger consent, take the following steps. Before off-duty change date, place the meter in an off or vacant position and illuminate the off-duty light. Or if driving a street at liberty, keep the appropriate off-duty code in LPEPP. After the off-duty change date, keep the appropriate off-duty code to TPEP or LPEP, transmit the relevant information to the electronic database for entering the electronic trip record, or make an appropriate written trip record entry. Proceed to the nearest location where he or she reasonably expects to obtain change. And if you don't do that part, make sure you know that you can get fined for $25. It's not much, but basically you're supposed to have a change all the time. Especially if you're working as a yellow and green cab, you know this cab's business, keep change with you just in case. Because you don't want to get risk of getting a fine because a customer can make a complaint that the driver doesn't have money. And if a driver ends up being found guilty, you can get fined $25, which is not a big deal, but why you want to go through that hassle. Okay, this, let me see, oh, the same thing. So I already won. The only portion that was cut off when the first part was part 1. This is what I read, so everything else is the same thing, so keep that in mind. 39, must accept credit or debit card payment. All taxi cabs are required to be equipped with TPEP, and driver must accept a passenger's choice to pay by credit or debit card. That's an option. You have to have that. It's a payment option. All street hail liveries are required to be equipped with LPEP, and driver must accept a passenger choice to pay by credit or debit card. Drivers of street hail liveries and vehicles using a non-fixed one device solution to accept credit or debit card payment are prohibited from taking the passenger's credit or debit card. A driver in such a vehicle must pass the one device solution to the passenger to allow the passenger to swipe his or her own card. The fine for that, if you don't do it, is $100. Part 2, a driver must not pick or transport a passenger with a system incapable of accepting or processing credit or debit card transaction unless prior to engaging the taximeter. Driver advises the passenger that he or she will not be able to use a credit or debit card for payment. If a customer efforts to pay credit or debit card at the end of the trip is prevented not by the taxi cabs, TPEP, or the street hail liveries LPEP system, but because the communication network is unable to process debit card payment at that time, the driver must offer the customer the option to pay either by paying cash or having the driver continue to a location where the wireless payment system can communicate with this network. So basically, if your system is down, you can't take the customer either by the customer can pay the driver by cash. If some reason that doesn't work, or the customer can go to the nearest, like for example, ATM or bank, withdraw the money, and they can give it to you. That's the only part of that. Now, if you don't do it, it is a $200 plead guilty before a hearing, and $300 or suspension up to 30 days if found guilty following a hearing. And there's points on this license as well, so keep that in mind. It's 1 point. You don't want that to happen on your license. No markup for credit payment. A driver must not charge any additional fee, markup to any passenger for credit debit card transaction for any trip in a taxi cab or for any hail trip in a street hail livery. Fine for that is $200, the first violation. Second violation is $300. The third violation is $500. In addition to the penalty of the payable to the commission, the administrative law judge may order the driver to pay resolution to the passenger equal to the excess amount that was charged to the passenger. So it doesn't make sense. So make sure you have a markup of credit card. Trips beyond the city. In general, for a trip anywhere beyond the city of New York other than to Westchester or Nassau County or Newark Airport, the following rules and charges apply. The driver must negotiate a flat rate trip charges with the passenger before beginning the trip. Note, a flat rate trip means a dollar amount. Double the meter is not a flat rate trip. Now, what it means, if you're taking a driver other than what's listed over here to somewhere else, you can charge them a flat rate trip, meaning like you could say, okay, I'm going to charge you $200. So even if it takes you $400, that's all you can charge. You can't charge, say, $600 after that. That's what it means, flat rate trip. You're agreeing to one amount. Fine for that is $100, and there's 2 points on your license. For a trip to Westchester or Nassau County, the following charge and rules apply. The driver must place a taximeter in a record position at the state of the trip and must keep the taximeter in the recording position at all times. And if you don't, the fine is $100. Before starting the trip, the driver must inform the passenger how the trip charge will be calculated, include the payment of tolls both to and from the destination for taxicabs, Chapter 82-26D2, the street hail livers. The rate of the fare will be amount shown on the taximeter for the portion of the trip within the city, plus twice the amount shown on the taximeter for the portion of the trip outside of the city limits. See Chapter 58-2D2. The driver must tell the passenger when the vehicle crosses the city limits so the passenger can check the reading on the taximeter at that time. The passenger is also responsible for all necessary toll charges for both going to the destination and for the driver return to the city. So keep that in mind as well. For a trip to Newark Airport, if you don't do that part, the first part, make sure you do that, what I just read, because the fine is $25. Now, for a trip to Newark Airport, the following charges and rules does apply. The driver must place the taximeter in a recording position at the start of the trip and must keep the taximeter in the recording position at all times. If you don't do that, it's a $100 fine. And before starting the trip, the driver must inform passengers how the trip will be calculated, including the payment of tolls and out of and back into the city. The rates of fare will be the amount shown on the taximeter plus a surcharge of $15. See Chapter 58 for taxicab and Chapters 82. Obviously, what we've been reading so far for street hail liveries. The passenger is also responsible for all necessary toll charge for both going to the destination and for the driver return to the city. So what it means, if you're taking somebody to Newark Airport, so keep that in mind that you have to charge from going and coming back, because you'll be charged. Let's say if you go to Newark Airport, you'll be charged the New Jersey Turnpike, and you'll be paying tolls for the going, and obviously you're going to be paying tolls for coming back as well. So the passenger's job to pay you all together, either from a flat rate trip or from the meter destination. They'll do that automatically. If you don't, that's $25 fine. For all out-of-city trip, the driver must record the charges and the out-of-city destination on the written trip record. TPEP or LPEP is not working. If you don't do that, it's $25 fine. The MTA tax must be charged on any trip in the taxi cab or in the hail trip in a street hail livery that starts in New York City and ends in any of the following places: New York City, Dutchess County, Nassau, Orange, Putnam, Rockland, and Suffolk County, and Westchester County as well. So keep that in mind. These are MTA tax. Prearranged trip in a street hail livery. For prearranged trip in a street hail livery, the following rule does apply. A driver in street hail livery in a prearranged trip must not charge or attempt to charge a fare above the pre-approved rate quoted by the dispatching base. You can't charge more than that. A driver of a street hail livery immediately after accepting a prearranged trip must enter the appropriate on-duty unavailable code into the LPEP. A driver of a street hail livery in a prearranged trip must place the taximeter in the recording position at the beginning of the trip or allowed to continue recording for the duration of the trip. A driver of a street hail livery must enter the total fare for the prearranged trip into the taximeter as a flat rate trip change using rate code at the beginning of the trip. A driver of a street hail livery can participate in any chairperson authorized group ride program in the hail zone or any chairperson approving multiple passengers ride program. Taxi cab improvement surcharges. When appropriating a taxi cab, the driver must remit the taxi cab improved surcharge to the taxi medallion owner. So keep that in mind. If you don't, it's $50 per occurrence. Street hail improvement surcharge. For each street hail trip in a street hail livery, the driver must remit the hail service improvement surcharge to the street hail livery license. If the $50 per occurrence, obviously. In e-payments, electronic payments. The payment for the fare for any trip paid for using an e-payment must not exceed commission-approved rates. So that's one important part. The fare must be calculated as recorded by these rules, and the taximeter must be used for all trips, including trips paid for by the e-payment. Any fare paid by the e-payment must be collected by the taximeter and not by any other methods. The itemized fare amount charged to the passenger must be automatically transmitted to the electronic hail. Application for TPEP and LPEP or the taximeters. For the taximeters, let's see. And relevant payment data necessary to obtain a complete trip record must be transmitted from the e-hail application to the TPEP or LPEP. Manual input of the fare by the driver or any other person into the e-hail electronic is not permitted. A violation of the paragraph 1 or 2 above the result in the fare excess of the commission approved rate is an overcharge under section 54-17. and 54-17I. And the driver must be subject to the penalty for an overcharge under section 54-02. So these are important rules. Just make sure that they're not going to ask you certain ways that these are what code is what, but it's keeping in mind by the violation and what each of these items are. Mandatory penalties as set forth in 54-02. So that's going to be on the section code, and whatever the mandatory penalties are in that section, that's going to be it. A driver must not accept credit card payment from a passenger by any e-hail application that does not integrate with a TPEP or LPEP. The fine for that is $350 if plead guilty before a hearing, and $500 if found guilty following a hearing. So basically, if you found guilty, you could just pay them $350 and say that I'm guilty. And if you go for a hearing and you found guilty, then it's $500. So you choose which of the fine do you want. Unless you have a good lawyer, you could defend that. Obviously, if you know that it wasn't your mistake, then that's something different. A driver must not accept any payment from a trip from an e-hail application that exceeds the total trip for the trip as calculated by the taximeter plus an optional tip. The fine for that is $350. Pleaded guilty after a hearing, it's $500. Operation lost property. Now, obviously, you know that people do lose their items. What is the procedure for that? That's what we're going to talk. Inspection following trips from airport. Immediately after completing a trip to Kennedy, LaGuardia, Newark, the driver must inspect the interior of the vehicle and trunk compartment if used to ensure the passengers have collected the property. And if you don't do that, guess what? There's a fine for that, which is $25. Handling of lost property is one of the most important questions, and they will ask you during the test as well. Anything lost property is important, especially this black boulder over here. So keep that in mind. This is something that they can ask you during the test. Handling of lost property. Property found by a driver in the taxi cab must be returned to the passenger. If possible, otherwise it must be taken without a delay to the police precinct closest to where the passenger was discharged. So you just go over there and give it to the cops. Property found by a driver in a street hail livery must be returned to the passenger if possible, otherwise it must be taken without delay to the vehicle street hail livery base. The fine for that could be $25 to $250. Before the off-duty change, actually, this is the next one. Yeah, I messed up with the pages, so that's why it's a little bit confusing. Notifying a commission regarding lost property. If the property is not returned to the passenger, the driver must promptly inform the commission of the details regarding the found property and the police precinct where it is held. The fine for that is $25. Limits on drivers soliciting of passengers in taxi cab. A driver of a taxi cab must not use a person other than a dispatcher in an authorized group ride taxi line or accessible taxi cab dispatcher to solicit passengers. However, a driver can use a licensed e-hail application. Use of any licensed e-hail application by the driver is optional. A driver may use only one electronic device with an e-hail application separate from the driver information monitor supplied as part of the TPEP and a device provided for the accessible dispatch program. That's one part. If you don't, $50 fine. A driver of a taxi cab must not pick up additional passengers during a trip except at the passenger's request. That fine is $100. A driver of a taxi cab must not suggest to a current passenger that an additional person to be accepted as a passenger. That is also $50 fine if you don't comply towards this. A driver of a taxi cab must not solicit or cruise for the purpose of soliciting passengers or accept passengers for transportation with the use of an e-hail application at Kennedy, LaGuardia, or Newark, within 100 feet of any authorized taxi stand, within the private streets of Lincoln Center, or any area of the city of New York where taxi cab cruising is prohibited. If you do, it's $100 guilty and pleaded guilty and $150 after the hearing. Before the off-duty change date, a driver of taxi cab who has illuminated the off-duty light must not solicit or accept a passenger unless all the following are true. The driver is returning to the taxi cab to his or her garage or home. The driver has committed the relevant information to electronic database for entry to electronic trip record or made written trip record entry, returning to the garage or home. The passenger destination is directly to the route to the driver home or garage. When the last passenger is discharged, the driver must lock the doors, return to his garage or home. After the off-duty change date, a driver who has entered the appropriate off-duty code in the TPEP must not solicit or accept a passenger unless all the following are true. The driver is returning to the taxi cab to his or her garage or home. The driver has transmitted to the relevant information to an electronic database for entry of the electronic trip record or made a written trip entry returning to garage or home. The passenger destination is directly to the route to the driver's home or garage. When the last passenger is discharged, the driver must lock the doors and return to his garage or home. If you don't do that, it's $100 pleaded guilty and $150 afterwards. Limits of driver solicitation of street hail livery. exclusionary zone. A driver of a street hail livery must not solicit passengers in the e-hail electronic zone from the vehicle. Fine for that is $500 for the first violation and suspension, and $750 for the second violation and 24 months in suspension. Revocation for the third violation in 120 months. So make sure don't do that. A driver of a street hail livery must not accept a prearranged trip beginning of the hail exclusionary zone. Hail zone inside the hail zone, a driver of a street hail livery can solicit passengers from the driver's seat of his or her street hail livery. Inside the hail zone, a driver of a street hail livery can accept a prearranged trip through the base with which the street hail livery is affiliated. A driver of a street hail livery must not solicit or cruise for the purpose of soliciting passengers within 100 feet of any authorized taxi stand. A driver of a street hail livery must not use a person other than a dispatch as an authorized group ride taxi line or a street hail livery zone or solicit passengers. The fine for that is $50, so make sure you keep that in mind. A driver of a street hail livery who has indicated in the meter or through the LPAP or he or she is off duty must not solicit or accept or passengers unless all the following are true. The driver is returning in the street hail livery is his or her base or home. The driver has transmitted the relevant information to an electronic database for entry of the electronic trip record or made a written trip entry data. The passenger destination is directed the route to the driver's home garage. When the last passenger is discharged, the driver must lock the doors and return to his garage or home. The driver is in the hail zone, and the fine for that is $75 and is also points. Taxi stands. A driver of a taxi cab has a right to take a position at any taxi stand having a vacancy, and no other taxi cab driver must interfere with that right. A driver of a street hail livery has a right to take a position at any taxi stand showing a vacancy in the hail zone, and no other drivers may intervene with that right. A driver of a street hail livery does not have the right to take a position at a taxi stand in the hail exclusionary zone. The fine for that is $100 if pleaded guilty and $150 afterwards. Number 2. A driver must not occupy a taxi stand in order to repair his or her vehicle, except for a minor emergency repair. That's different. And if you find guilty, it's $100 and $150 afterwards. A driver must not overcrowd, crash into or back into a front position of a taxi stand. A driver must take the rear position of the line formatted as such a stand unless it is a relief stand that has a vacancy. Again, the violations are listed over there. A driver must occupy a taxi stand when on duty or for no longer than 1 hour while relief title for the personal use off duty. Again, the violations are listed below. The driver of each of the first two vehicles on a taxi stand other than a relief stand must remain in the driver's seat ready to accept passengers. Any other drivers or a taxi stand must be no more than 15 feet from his or her vehicle unless he or she is off duty. Fine is $150 if pleaded guilty before a hearing and $150 afterwards. Except where expressly forbidden, a taxi, cab, or street hail livery is permitted to stop and wait for passenger in the space immediately in front of a fire hydrant or a street where parking is not forbidden, provided the driver remains seated in his or her vehicle ready for operation at all times. Fine for that, again, is the same as the first one. Terminals. The rules regarding taxi stand also apply to special taxi stands and feed lines at air, rail, bus, or ship terminals. Note that these rules are applied to street hail liveries for terminals located in the hail zone. When a terminal provides a taxi cab or street hail livery holding areas, number 1, driver must park in the vehicle or a taxi holding area before leaving relief time. Upon returning from relief time, the driver must join the end of the feed line. A driver are not permitted to bring a passenger into the holding area. You have to remember that because certain people might do that. Fine for that is $50. When an airport taxi stand offers both long hail and short hail lines, if there are taxi cab available in both lines, a driver in the short haul lines must not accept a passenger for a long haul. A driver in the long haul line must not accept passengers for a short haul. And the fine for that is $100. Drivers of accessible taxi cab. Drivers of accessible taxi cabs on trip dispatched by the accessible taxi dispatcher must comply with all service rules, including rules pertaining to meter and fares provided in this chapter. A driver of accessible taxi cab who has been dispatched with the accessible taxi dispatcher is entitled to be paid the dispatch fee with the accessible taxi dispatcher. This includes trip which ends with no wheelchair using passengers or only passengers being picked up. Operation refusing passengers. Must not refuse to transport passengers unless the driver has justified grounds. The driver must not refuse to transport in any of the following circumstances. Mandatory transport. A driver must not refuse by words, gesture, or any other means to take a passenger, including a person with disability, and any service animals accompanying his individual, to any destination within the city of New York, the counties Westchester, or Nassau or Newark Airport. This is mandatory penalty is set for the 54-02. Attendance for disability passenger. A passenger must not require a person with disability to be accompanied by an attendant. However, if a person with a disability is accompanied by an attendant, the taxi cab driver, or as applicable for a hired vehicle driver, the paratransit drivers, when driving a street hail livery, must not impose or attempt to impose any additional charge for transporting the attendant. The mandatory fine is again the same section as this one, 54-02. Luggage and mobility aid. A driver must not refuse to transport a passenger's luggage, wheelchair, crutches, other mobility aid, or any other property. Again, the penalty is the same as the ones I just stated. Destination in advance. A driver must not attempt to learn the destination of a passenger before the passenger is seated in the taxi cab or for hail trip record in the hail zone and street hail livery. So there is a penalty for that as well. This is going to be the last one before I'll do a part 2 as well. It's a lot of items to put in all together. E-hail application. A driver must not refuse to transport a passenger that accepts a hail from the passengers by means of an e-hail application. Justification for refusing a passenger. The following are permitted reasons for refusing to transport. Another passenger is already seated in the vehicle. That's one way. A driver has already acknowledged a hail from another person, and that other person is picked up or is about to be picked up at caution. A driver must not acknowledge the hail of one person over another in order to avoid transporting the person whose hail was not acknowledged. So make sure that keep in mind. The passenger is carrying or is possession of any article, package, case, or container which the driver reasonably believes that it will cause damage to the vehicle. Caution: this does not include wheelchair, crutches, or service animals, or any other mobility aid used by disabled passengers. Mobility aid must be accepted. The driver is discharging his last passengers or passenger prior to going off duty and has already, before the off-duty change date, illuminated his off-duty light if driving a taxi cab, or entered the off-duty button in the taxi meter if driving a street hail livery, and transmitted or entered the appropriate data. After the off-duty change date, order the appropriate off-duty code in TPAP or LPAP. The driver is ending his or her work shift and has already, before the off-duty change date, illuminated the off-duty sign if driving a taxi cab, or entered the off-duty button on the taxi meter if driving a street hail livery, locked both rear doors, and transmitted or entered the appropriate data. That was a lot of information that I read. Hopefully I didn't want to go over like a robot and read everything line by line. I tried my best, but some of the things are so self-explanatory. So keep this in mind when you're studying for this test. Make sure certain things are bolded, like they're what's the word? They're illuminated darker. Those questions can be asked during the test. So you have to remember that part. Like certain things, like for example, solicitation to the passengers, refusing a passenger. They might ask you a question during the test, but they might ask you in a way that you'll see there might be more than one answer. The only part is not to get confused, is to read. The more you read about it, the more you learn, the more you could figure out which one is the errors and which one's the real ones. Hopefully, I was able to explain to you. For those people that have a hard time understanding the language of English, I just want to read everything out, but at the same time help you guys explain to you about the rules of the TLC test. If you guys have any other questions, comment, concern, please comment, like, subscribe. If you have questions about the test, comment in the video, and I'll try to help you guys out as much as possible using the, by replying to your comment. Again, guys, thank you for your time to watch this video, and I really appreciate it. Again, if you have any questions, again, guys, don't hesitate to ask. I'm a very quick reply. I'll reply to you guys as soon as possible. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you guys love the video.